Alright everyone, welcome back. We're finally going to go ahead and do another progress video on the A10. I want to apologize, it's been so long. Unfortunately, 2020 has been a very complicated time for many people, myself included. Work's been very stressful. My other hobbies have been picking up and getting busier this year. Been doing a little bit of traveling, not much, but a little bit. And unfortunately, one of my animals got, or my pets got a little or got very sick this year, and so that's been something I've had to deal with as well. So all of that just kind of ended up with me not creating any more videos on the A10 and not making any more progress. I did have to build, or I did build another aircraft for a former team lead of mine. He retired, so I took the opportunity to commemorate that with a model of the aircraft we worked on together. I do not have that to post, unfortunately. Additionally, I was doing some reflecting on this channel, and uh, I I get relatively self-conscious about this channel. However, I've eventually got to the terms of, who cares? And as well, you know, whoever in the future can come back and watch me as a late 20s guy doing this, and whoever knows me later in life, I think that's a relatively cool opportunity to kind of communicate across years or decades or however long that this content stays up. And so I thought that was a pretty neat opportunity and shouldn't be squandered or wasted. And so I'm gonna push forward. I'm gonna keep going, and hopefully I'll find more of a rhythm, and we'll get back into it. So I'm very excited to keep going. Rolling right into it, another reason I haven't wanted to continue as enthusiastically as previously, or as I previously had before, is we're coming up to probably one of the most loathsome parts of this hobby, and that is painting. Uh, Everybody's got an opinion on how to paint these things, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you before we get started, paint it how you want. And if anybody's complaining about it, tell them to get a hobby, because clearly this is more of a profession for them than a hobby. So, there will always be the rivet counters. There's always going to be somebody telling someone else that they're doing it wrong. It's just a fact of how this hobby is if you're sharing it publicly like this. And I assume at some point I may get a similar feedback, but you know what? At the end of the day, uh, I'm happy with how this is turning out so far, and how other models using this process have turned out as well. So recently I started priming my models. Didn't historically do this, but I found it relatively well, it increases the quality of the paint, the finished product at the end. So I typically will use I think it's a Vallejo uh, primer. And so here you can see me applying the primer to the underside of the ventral side of the aircraft. I believe also if you look closely up in the nose gear wheel well, you can actually see some of the fishing bob weights that I had to put in the nose to get this thing to sit on its nose wheel. Very common problem with tricycle gear, particularly with model kit makers that aren't as high quality. I believe this is a Revell kit, and it's not the greatest. Revell, they do okay for beginners. They do okay for the moderate levels as well, but the kits at the lower levels do have their issues. I firmly believe the Revell Mark II Spitfire is one of the worst kits that I have ever made, just because of fit issues. And so the A10, it fits together very well as we've seen so far, but at the end of the day, the balance on the model is off, and so you need some weight in the nose. So moving forward, we're going to prime the aircraft, and luckily with the airbrush and with this primer combination, it actually dries relatively quickly, so I have no qualms about setting it down. I'm also going to prime the myriad of stores that you can put on this model. Uh, the A10's got a massive carrying capacity, which is reflected in this kit. So get ready, if you're building this, to be doing a lot of filing and sanding and gluing together small parts for bombs and missiles and drop tanks and all the like. Additionally, here you can see that I've recently attached the engine nacelles. I've also recently put together all the munitions, and I've put together the wheels. So very, very tedious work. a lot of dexterity required, and honestly a lot of sanding to get the finishes right. And honestly, getting the finishes right on the stores is something that I've personally been working on. You usually get to the end of a model, you've painted the thing, and you just want to be done. And so one of my bad habits was actually rushing through the weapon stores on the bottom of the model and not really paying them the due diligence that they should have, particularly because it's a very easy way to increase the quality of the model, right? Go through, put the decals on all the munitions, get the paint right, weathering. There is actually some weathering on some of these things. Um, that's entirely up to you as to how much you want to do. I mean, ultimately, weathering is up to anyone. So, going forward with some conversation about the painting process. So, we're going to start with prime. Uh, this A10 is actually for a friend of mine. I think I've mentioned that before, and so they requested it just be the standard, almost battleship gray. I don't know the exact name of the color. So that's the color we're going after. So we're gonna go ahead and prime the entire thing, and then we'll move on to painting with the gray color. After we do the gray color, what we'll end up doing is weathering it slightly. Again, all personal taste. You can leave it looking perfect if you want it looking like it's just come out of the factory, or you can go ahead and do the weathering. I'm experimenting with more weathering techniques. I'll cover those as I get there. Um, Spoiler alert: it actually will be the next video because I painted the A10 and I, for some reason, seem to have lost the footage. So maybe I'll do a video on another aircraft painting in the middle just to kind of cover the topic, but and some of the techniques. But yeah, the A10 as it sits right now is painted gray, and so I did actually miss one step. We will do some pre-shading with black along what would be the aircraft ribs and the aircraft formers. Some of the underlying structure where the ripples in the structure because of the underlying support would generate a little bit of ripple in the surface on the skins, and so as a result you'll get some shading just naturally from the way the light hits it. This is really easy to accomplish doing a little bit of black undertoning. It is also really good around panel lines to start approaching the idea of there being some dirt. And so, yeah, be careful with knives, kids. Just gonna throw that out there while that little shot of me using that blade comes on the screen. And again, we're not just priming the big parts; we're priming the small parts. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So we're gonna do some pre-shading, then we're gonna do the gray, then we'll do the weathering. Following weathering, we will end up doing a clear coat of gloss. Believe it or not, when you are airbrushing, what you leave behind is a relatively rough surface texture. So unless you want to buff it, make sure your paint's thick enough that you can sit there with a 3000 grit pad like I have at the top right of the screen and actually buff the paint to a really, really smooth surface. You're gonna need a smooth surface for the decals to stick and to stick well. And so gloss is a really easy way to achieve this. I am experimenting currently in the camp of using floor wax, a specific kind of floor wax, to get a nice smooth finish. I'm trying to use Pledge right now, and well, I'll use it on the A10 and we'll see how the decals come out. And so having the smooth surface really helps the decals to stick to the model, to the plastic itself, and make sure they stay there, because immediately following the decals you're going to be hitting it with the airbrush, and if your decals are not stuck, what ends up happening is you launch decals all over the room and they become completely unusable again because either you've torn them apart in the process of ripping them off the skin of the aircraft, or the surface of the model rather, or they fold up on themselves and they get crumpled, and the process of untangling them just becomes a nightmare. I had this happen to an F-14, and it's actually showing the decals. The decals are desponding right now. It's actually at my office at work, And so I'm slowly watching all the decals come off of it, and it's already the second time I've built that model, so I really need to reevaluate what I'm going to do with it. The paint's fine, so now I just have to face the question. In this view, we'll take a second. That probe on the wingtip, if you are building this model, be insanely careful with it. I have glued it back in place 3 times now because in carelessness or not paying attention, I will hit it against things, I will bump it with my arm, hit it with my wrist, what have you. I will break it. And it's a pain in the butt to either make sure that I know where it landed and glue it back in, or find it again if it lands on the floor. So back to the thing. So, or back to the process. So once we've got the decals on, we apply. Then we're going to do a little bit more weathering. We'll do our panel lines at that point, get that all set up. The weathering, on a real aircraft would be on top of whatever painted on decals there are. Most military aircraft like this have their insignias and whatnot actually painted on them, particularly the ones that can go supersonic, because the heating and the air resistance from what would be a decal essentially will rip them off. Even being such a minute, raised surface against the skin, it will actually provide enough force to pull them off. And so most of them are painted on, therefore you're going to get the weathering and the aging effect on top of the decal, or on top of the paint. So as we continue with this model, we need to be conscious of that. And so our weathering is going to have to sit on top of the painted surface. Once we have all our weathering completed, we will go ahead and move to the next step, but I want to touch on weathering a bit more real quick. So for weathering, we're looking for establishing the panel lines. Panel lines can be done really 2 ways. So on the first way that's more common is you get a panel line accent color, typically black, brown, dark gray, the darker colors that would reflect dirt being stuck in the recesses between panels on the skin of the aircraft. So there is that method. Another method that I really like, and I haven't played around with it too much yet, but I'm hoping to get to it in the future. Probably not on the A10, most likely on one of my next naval aircraft builds, or naval fighter aircraft builds. But when these aircraft are in service, they're frequently having panels removed and maintenance being performed underneath them. And as a result, when they take the fasteners out that hold the panels down, they'll end up scratching or otherwise marking or marring the surfaces where the fasteners are. And so when they put the panels back on, they'll actually repaint and touch up those corners. So if you put a lighter, fresh layer of paint just in a line down the edge of the panel, it actually looks really good, particularly for panels that would be frequently opened, which is easily researched online. You can look at maintenance for the A10 or the F-18, the F-14, the S-3, whatever you're building. Following weathering, what we're going to look at is applying another clear coat. This time it'll be a dull matte gray coat, dull matte clear coat, not gray coat. That will restore us back to not being glossy, because the A-10 is not a glossy aircraft. There are very few actual gloss aircraft in the U.S. military service. And so from there, we should be done painting completely, other than doing some minor detailing or what have you, getting dirt in the landing gear wheels and things like that. At that point, we should be relatively close to done. So this video, as we've seen, is the first step. It's prime. The next video will likely be weathering, because I've already painted the aircraft, and we'll get to that hopefully soon. I'm going to try work on this in a more scheduled and regimed way. I've got some big ideas for some projects coming up, and I'd really like to get started on those. So, finishing up this one by putting in the nose landing gear wheel well, or nose landing gear components. Again, underneath that we've got fishing bob weights to hold the nose down. And we'll catch you all next time.